What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Today we're taking a look at another journey through a champion's history featuring everyone's favorite or perhaps most hated healer, Soraka. As with Jax, Soraka has been a part of the game since the alpha stage, meaning that we've got a ton of changes to cover. And remember, you guys can always suggest the next champion for us to do in the comments, and leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and a dislike if you didn't. Soraka was released as one of the original 17 champions in League of Legends in the alpha stage. She was designed by Ginsu as a mage that tapped into the power of the cosmos to aid her allies. In her original lore, she was a champion of the Ionian people who was overcome by her anger and hatred towards Warwick, at the time a mercenary for Noxus, who had slain countless of Soraka's kin. She herself cursed him to become the beast he is today and lost most of her power for it. Still though, she hung on to enough power to save the life of that top laner that you were just about to kill. Soraka started off pretty differently to how she is now. Her Q was called Star Call, striking nearby enemies and reducing their magic resistance, stacking multiple times. And instead of the instant healing that she's known for now, her W was called Bless, which was a very long duration heal over time that lasted 16 seconds, as well as providing a damage reduction effect to it. Her E was Wish, an ability that restored mana to a friendly unit and had no use at all against enemies. Her ultimate Purify would cleanse all debuffs alongside a huge heal for a single teammate, similar to Mikhail's Crucible almost. Consecration was her passive, and it actually gave bonuses to her basic abilities. It originally increased the damage of her Q, cooldown of her mana restoring E, and the duration of her W heal and damage reduction buff. Riot soon decided that instead of removing debuffs from an ally, Soraka's ultimate should have some kind of impact on the rest of the map. Her ultimate Purify was replaced with Wish, a global heal that has been a core part of Soraka's kit since all the way back in the alpha stage. Her E was called Wish at the time, so it was renamed to Infuse to cause less confusion. Her W Bless was also given a nice update to its name, replaced with the name Astral Blessing early on in the alpha stage. However, the ability itself didn't really change that much. This kit didn't change at all pretty much overall until a closed beta patch on June 19th, 2009, which reworked her passive Consecration into the magic resistance aura, basically turning her into a walking Aegis of the Legion. The first big change to an ability that Soraka saw after beta was to her W, Astral Blessing, on patch 61. Up until this point, it had been a heal over time effect, but Riot eventually decided that it should just be an instant heal instead, leaving only the armor buff with the duration. She had a few minor tweaks and changes here and there for most of Season 1, but for the most part, these were just generally nerfs, because Soraka was such a powerful champion that stayed in the meta for quite a long time. A couple were targeted at some irritating features, such as her passive magic resistance aura sticking around after she died, but most of the changes, such as increasing her cooldowns, were aimed at dialing down her insane healing power that she had gained when they changed her W. Patch 124 was quite huge and featured a ton of tweaks to the abilities of quite a few different champions, Soraka included. This was a big gameplay update, not a rework though, aimed at making Soraka a little bit more competitive after these small nerfs over the months had started to add up. Her Star Call was given better scaling and a cooldown reduction effect, along with more range and a mana cost reduction. It could also stack the magic resistance debuff less, but gave more per stack as she leveled it up. Her W had its ability power ratios cut in half, but the base heal increased, letting her itemize more defensively rather than needing to risk ability power items. The cooldown was doubled, but the armor buff and duration were both increased, making it even more important to time its use properly. Her E had its ability power ratio increased and the cooldown reduced, but the silence duration was reduced and it had a slight mechanics tweak to where it would no longer give double the mana when cast on herself. In line with the other changes to make her less reliant on ability power, Wish also had its ability power ratio nerfed, but the mana cost reduced by a significant amount. Riot didn't manage to get Soraka quite to where they wanted her with those changes, and she was constantly tweaked from patch to patch with some minor changes here and there. In patch 148, she received an update that had nothing to do with her gameplay though, a visual update with a revised lore to go with it. It didn't really change the nature of her lore, just went into maybe a little bit more detail, such as giving a little bit of the background to Runeterra, along with Warwick's nickname, the Deathmaker, given to him by the Ionians because of the atrocities that he caused with his chemical weapons. It also gave a little bit of information about Soraka's ascension to power and her ambition to redeem herself for cursing Warwick with his werewolf form. She wasn't touched at all during Season 2, and she didn't see any more changes until later on in Season 3, and this was a pretty interesting time in Soraka's history because AP Soraka mid was actually starting to rise to power and see some play as a competitive option. It wasn't necessarily that powerful for killing enemies compared to other mid laners, but Soraka mid was crazy good at farming and staying alive and brought insane amounts of utility, making it quite difficult to deal with in a lot of certain team compositions. Of course, being one of Riot's original supports, Riot took this rise to power of AP Soraka as a challenge and, well, gave her a massive rework on patch 3.14. Soraka's first rework in Season 3 included nerfs focused on AP mid Soraka, along with a few other mechanics changes to make her need to itemize differently. First up was her passive, completely removed and replaced with a new ability changed to Salvation, which increased her health and mana restoration abilities by 1% for every 2% of the target's missing health or mana. Along with this was a Star Call based damage buff and cooldown reduction if it hits an enemy, and the W had its heal AP scaling just destroyed in favor of an armor buff aimed at making it more valuable on support when you didn't have any ability power. Infuse also now caused Soraka to drain her own mana to restore an ally's mana, and it had its damage nerfed to make it less effective in the mid lane, so she could no longer cast it on herself to gain mana. Her ultimate also received a big nerf to both its base heal and AP scaling, although it was given a tweak to let it affect untargetable allies such as someone using Zhonya's. The changes did a decent job of making Soraka's support more appealing, although she was still picked up in the mid lane occasionally, usually as a counterpick to the new champion Yasuo, once players had started to figure him out a bit. Soraka survived with no changes in Season 4 right up until the pro player high on Cloud 9 brought the spotlight back to AP Soraka mid, prompting Riot to quickly answer with some nerfs. On patch 4.8 and 4.9 tweaking her Q damage and the cooldown reduction from hitting champions. Although this successfully discouraged the Soraka mid players, it was a little bit more of a temporary fix until her second rework later on patch 4.17. This was definitely the biggest change Soraka's ever received in the game's history, focusing on gameplay changes through entirely new abilities. Her passive Salvation was mostly replaced with a new ability that gave movement speed for Soraka when moving towards lower health allies. Star Call was also kind of changed into a new ability that was a skill shot calling down a star to target at a location that dealt damage in the area. Enemies hit directly took 50% more damage and were slowed for 2 seconds. This, along with the removal of the magic resistance debuff and spammable nature, meant that Star Call became a utility spell rather than this great wave clearing tool, which played a huge part in stopping Soraka mid from ever finding relevance again. The other part was a change to her W. It had the armor buff removed and its healing power increased, and the cooldown lowered by quite a bit, but it now cost 10% of Soraka's health and could no longer be used on herself. This killed off Soraka mid completely, as now she has no way to sustain in the lane, and her W is just completely useless when she's in a solo lane situation. Her ultimate was the only part of her kit that didn't become a significantly different ability. Instead, it was just given a nice quality of life change that had it remove grievous wounds before healing allies, and also healing low health allies a little bit more. The changes were reasonably well received overall, but she was a little bit on the weak side at the start because of Riot's very delicate approach with the numbers, and was given some buffs to her W on patch 420 and 421, as well as a slight nerf to the E's cooldown. And once again, Soraka was able to find a pretty nice place in the meta without necessarily being too weak or too dominant. She went through most of Season 5 without notable changes, only receiving a couple of small nerfs to her Q range and W mana cost on patch 524. Pre-Season 6 though was a scary time for the Soraka players. The problem was that she was getting really powerful in the meta, and people knew that she was going to be in line for some nerfs to tone her down eventually. Riot finally gave her another kind of mini rework on patch 6.5 that was aimed at making Soraka a little bit easier to deal with for her opponents, making Soraka take more risks rather than just sitting back and healing her partner from a distance. In return, her Q was made a little bit more spammable and gave her the ability to slow all units hit, not just the ones in the middle, but she could no longer deal that 150% damage to the targets in the center. She also gained a new buff, Rejuvenation, that gives her health over 4 seconds, along with movement speed away from enemies, with the aim of making Soraka play a more active role in fights. Astral Infusion also received a big mechanics change. The base heal was nerfed massively, but if she used it while rejuvenated by her Q, she would also give that rejuvenation healing over time effect to her target as well. The idea was to make it so that Soraka had a little bit more of a fair gameplay pattern, having to get in and fight to get the maximum benefit from her W healing. It definitely made her more fun to play, but it also turned out to be a huge buff when it was kind of intended to be a nerf. Soraka became a crazy dominant pick instantly from this point forward, and was picked in almost every game as the go-to support. She was hit with a couple of mana cost increases to her Q and W in patch 6.7, but it hasn't done that much to stop her rampage as the queen of support champions. She's still quite a dominant support pick now, although since patch 6.9, she's been a little bit less annoying to play against after she saw one last nerf to her Q that cut out some of the slow percent and the movement speed buff from the rejuvenation. That was the very last change that she's seen so far, so as for the future, well, only Riot can tell. And that brings us to the end of our look into Soraka's history. She ended up having a total of, I believe, 3 gameplay updates, and quite a few tweaks over the years as Riot worked hard to find a fair spot for League's #1 healer to be. Make sure to let us know what your thoughts on her changes throughout the years are in the comments below, and looks like that's going to be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.